In this third unit of the course, we're looking at the mind-body problem, and we've looked now at a range of views that one could take on this issue to do with the relation between the mental side of our existence and the physical side of our existence. How should we understand the connection between the two? We're concluding with a couple of criticisms of any materialist or physicalist account of mind. We looked last time at Nagel's article, What Is It Like to Be a Bat? And we'll conclude now with Frank Jackson's article, What Mary Didn't Know. Both criticisms of any materialist or physicalist account of mind. Those two terms for our purposes mean the same thing, using them interchangeably, but Nagel tends to use the term materialist, Jackson tends to use the term physicalist, so I may go back and forth. But any theory of mind according to which the mental can be reduced to the physical, Nagel and Jackson, as we've seen, are sharp critics of any such approach. The structure of each of these last two arguments is much the same. At first glance, they might appear to be different kinds of thought experiments because Nagel's thought experiment has to do with a bat and Jackson's thought experiment has to do with another human being. So at first glance, they might appear to be different, but you will have noticed from your reading that the structure of the two is much the same. As Bonger and Baker point out in their introduction to our selections from Jackson, the argument here is an example of what has come to be known in the literature as the knowledge argument. Here again, we saw Nagel argue about what you wouldn't know under a certain hypothetical scenario. And that's going to be true of what Mary didn't know as well. And so there have been a number of arguments in the literature like this. Much the same structure. They're grouped together under this heading, the knowledge argument. Here again, Nagel's thought experiment, as we saw, was that you could know everything that there is to know about the neurophysiology of bats, everything that there is to know about what happens in a bat's brain and nervous system. You could be the world's foremost authority on bat brains. You could understand all of the neural and biochemical processes that go on in a bat's brain. All of that knowledge would not get you one whit closer to knowing what it's like to be a bat. And Jackson's thought experiment is much the same, although it has to do with another human being. In the What Mary Didn't Know thought experiment, we're asked to hypothesize someone who, for whatever reason, has always lived in a black and white room and has no access to the outside world except black and white television. Now, this hypothetical subject, Mary, is able to read, able to study, and let's imagine that physics is completed. Physics comes to an end. That is to say, all the causal laws that determine everything physical that will ever happen in the universe have been identified. Physics has come to an end. Physics has been completed. Chemistry has been completed. Neurophysiology has been completed. So these branches of the physical sciences have been completed. All of the causal laws that there are to discover have been discovered. And Mary, living her life in this black and white room, no access to the outside world except a black and white TV, has been studying completed physics and chemistry and neurophysiology. And so she knows everything physical that there is to know about the world. She knows everything physical that there is to know. So in this scenario, Jackson says she learns everything there is to know about the physical nature of the world. She knows all the physical facts about us and our environment, including completed physics, chemistry, and neurophysiology. and all there is to know about the causal and relational facts consequent upon all this, including, of course, functional roles. So she understands what role is played by each mental state. That's what is meant here in saying she understands the functional role of every internal state that is associated with some brain state. Let's put it that way. So she understands everything physical that there is to understand about the surface of a tomato. She understands the microphysical structure of the surface of a tomato. She understands that that particular surface reflects light at a certain wavelength, and she understands that that wavelength is the one that causes people with color vision to utter the word red. Now, her understanding of color vision in this scenario would here again be an understanding entirely at the level of physiology, of color perception on the one hand. So knowing in physiological terms what goes on in people with color vision. So here again, knowing what goes on at the neural level and the biochemical level. And she understands that the functional role of the internal state of the subject, perceiving light of a certain wavelength, the functional role, let's say, of seeing a ripe tomato is, among other things, the functional role that causes subjects to utter the word red. Okay, so she, of course, understands the language, understands, here again, everything physical that goes on in a subject, and even understands all the facts, all the relevant facts, here again, what Jackson calls relational facts. So understands the relational fact that perceiving a ripe tomato causes, among other things, people to utter the word red. So, and here again, she would understand that relational fact in terms of a strictly physical description of the surface of a tomato. So she could understand the way that, say, for example, a physicist describes the color red. The physicist describes the color red in a way that makes no reference to the sensible idea that we have of it, that makes no reference to the red that we see, that makes no reference to what it's like to notice a particular shade of red. So knows everything there is to know about physics, neurophysiology, and the interaction between the two, you might say. That's what is meant here by hypothesizing, as Jackson does here, that she knows all the relational facts and all the functional roles. So a relational fact, for example, would be here again the relation between what happens in the perceptual physiology of the subject and what happens in terms of the power of the tomato to reflect light of a certain wavelength, and understands in connection with that, all of those relational facts, understands that the functional role of that interaction is, among other things, to prompt subjects with color vision to utter the word red. Okay. So she knows everything physical there is to know. So you will notice here that Jackson is attentive to including in the thought experiment here again this notion of the functional role played by the internal state of the subject who is able to coordinate inputs and outputs. Mary understands all that as well. So Jackson's last point here is aimed at functionalist theories of mind. She understands all the functional roles that are involved in the entity that coordinates inputs and outputs. In this case, an input would be the light reflected off the surface of the tomato, light of a certain wavelength, and light of that wavelength is reflected because of the microphysical structure of the surface of that object. And here again, the output would be, in this case, uttering the word red. That would be one of the numerous outputs that would be associated with that particular input, but one of the characteristic outputs would be to prompt people to utter the word red. So she understands all those physical facts, and here again understands that the functional role of the interaction between the light reflected off the tomato and what happens in terms of physiology of perception in the subject. She understands that the functional role in that case is, among other things, getting the subject to utter the word red. So she knows everything physical there is to know. It seems, however, Jackson writes, that Mary does not know all there is to know. For when she's let out of the black and white room, she will learn what it is like to see something red. So here again, the what it's like, the qualitative content or the qualitative character. It's also sometimes called the phenomenal character or the subjective character of an experience, of a particular kind of experience, in this case, the experience of seeing something red. She knew everything physical that there was to know about the world because she knew the entire set of physical facts, and yet there was something that she didn't know. She didn't know what it's like to see something red. Which goes to show, according to Jackson, that one can know everything physical that there is to know, and one still wouldn't know everything there is to know. Which means not everything that there is to know is a physical fact. And so we saw J.J.C. Smart say that when this hypothesized completion of physics, neurophysiology, and so forth is reached, there will be a completed, as he called it, physicalist picture. That is to say, all of the causal laws that determine all of the physical events that happen in the world, they've all been discovered, and you'll recall Smart said there won't be anything left outside the physicalist picture. There won't be any nomological danglers, you'll recall Smart said. There won't be any facts about reality left dangling outside the web of causal laws that determine everything that happens, the kinds of causal laws discovered by the physical sciences. Jackson is saying in so many words, yes, there will be. And here's a simple thought experiment to prove it. This hypothetical subject would know everything physical there is to know, but she wouldn't know everything there is to know. That goes to show that not everything there is to know is physical. There will be facts left outside of the physicalist picture. So here again, Jackson, Smart, they could look at the same hypothetical scenario and draw quite different lessons, make quite different inferences from that hypothesized scenario. What Mary doesn't know is the kind of qualitative character, or again, phenomenal character. I've used a few different terms for the same idea. There are a few different terms in the literature for this idea of the what it's like. I think that's the simplest way to understand this notion of what is in the literature tagged as phenomenal character or phenomenal content or qualitative character or qualitative content. Jackson introduces another term for us in this article, qualia. Qualia is a very common term for much the same idea now in the literature. Here again, the what it's like. The what it's like to notice the particular shade of red of a ripe tomato. What it's like to notice the distinctive tone of a clarinet. What it's like to inhale the aroma of Starbucks. What it's like to feel the distinctive texture of flannel. What it's like to have all these different subjective experiences. There is a phenomenal character to all these experiential states, to all these mental states. There is some content, some qualitative character, some It's sometimes called the raw feel. You know what it's like to have this experience. But the what it's like here again doesn't figure in any objective physical description of what is going on in the world, including what is going on in the physiology of a human being having that experience. The qualitative content, the phenomenal character, the subjective character of the experience, here again the what it's like, the objective physical description of that phenomenon at the level of what happens in the brain, or at the level of what happens in the environment, or in terms of what happens in the interaction between the brain and the perceptual physiology and the environment. All those kinds of objective descriptions can be given completely without making any reference to the what it's like of the experience, the phenomenal character of the experience. So what Mary doesn't know is the kind of qualitative character or phenomenal character that is a part of certain kinds of experiences. So here again, she knows everything in completed physics. So she knows everything about light waves, say for example, and she knows what wavelength of light will be reflected by the surface of a ripe tomato, knows everything in physiology, so she knows everything there is to know about the eye and the brain and the optic nerve, knows everything that there is to know about our visual physiology. And yet she could have known all of that and still not known what it's like to see red, which again, according to Jackson, shows that not everything there is to know is physical. The set of physical facts is not the complete set of facts. A reduction of the mental to the physical is, here again, Jackson is saying in principle, just as we saw Nagel saying, is in principle not possible, because an objective description of what goes on here, what goes on here, what goes on here, here, the tomato, the wavelengths of light, the eye, the optic nerve, the brain. An objective physical description of all the processes that go on at the microphysical level in all those entities can be complete without making any reference to the what it's like to have the experience of the person with whom that brain and eye and optic nerve and total physiology is connected. The person who has all those physical processes going on in terms of that particular interaction with that particular physical object in the environment is having an experience of a certain kind with a certain kind of subjective character. And if you leave an account of the character of that experience out of account in your theory of mind, then it's not a complete theory of mind. But as I just said, everything objective that goes on here in the physiology and the physical environment and the interaction between the two, everything that goes on there can be completely accounted for without any reference to what it's like. You can have a complete physical theory. The physicalist picture could be completed without any reference to the subjective character of the experience. But that just goes to show that a complete theory of mind will never be reducible to a complete physical theory, according to Jackson. So in our selections from Jackson's article, we have a concise statement of the knowledge argument. The knowledge argument against physicalism or materialism, any theory of mind according to which the mental can be reduced to the physical. Premise 1, Mary knows before her release everything physical there is to know about other people. Premise 2, Mary before her release does not know everything there is to know about other people because she learns something about them on her release. Here again, she learns what it's like to see red. And they've been having this experience unbeknownst to her. She didn't realize what it was like to have this experience, even though she understood the total set of physical facts associated with this experience. Therefore, conclusion, there are truths about other people and herself which escape the physicalist story. So the physicalist picture could be completed, the complete web of causal laws that determine all the physical events that happen in the universe. That picture could be completely, that story could be completely filled in, that picture could be completely filled in, and there would still be things that would be left outside of that story. The trouble for physicalism, Jackson writes, is that after Mary sees her first ripe tomato, she will realize how impoverished her conception of the mental life of others has been all along. Here again, she knew the total set of physical facts, and yet something so basic to the life of the mind, something so basic to our sensible lives as knowing what it's like to see a particular shade of red, she knew nothing about that. She had been ignorant of the qualia, to use this term that Jackson uses. She had been ignorant of the qualia that attach to certain kinds of experience. What it's like to feel the particular texture of the surface of a ripe tomato, what it's like to notice the particular shade of red of a ripe tomato. She had been completely ignorant of this, what it's like, but for that reason, as Jackson says, her conception of the mental lives of others was a poor one. It was completely impoverished, because think how much of our mental lives is made up by that, here again, qualitative character of the experiences. And she'd been completely ignorant of all that. This is just one example. Just multiply the example by all the different kinds of sensible experiences that we have, and you realize that her conception of our mental lives when she was in the black and white room, just to stick to the level of colors for those of us with color vision, her conception of our mental lives was really quite impoverished. She knew everything physical that there was to know about us, the total set of physical facts, the total set of facts about our physiology and the physics of our interaction with objects in the world around us. But she understood so little of what the content of our mental lives is actually like. So she had been ignorant of the qualia. Here again, qualia is Jackson's term. In the literature, there are a few different terms for much the same idea, the what it's like, the phenomenal character, the subjective character, the qualitative content or the qualitative character. What it's like to be in that experience. And here again, as we saw Nagel emphasize, what it's like to have that experience, what it's like to be in the perspective of the perceiving subject, that's only accessible from the inside. It's only accessible from one point of view, namely that of the experiencing subject. And it's only accessible from the inside. A physicalist theory of mind, like any physical theory, necessarily would be constructed from the outside, as it were, from the third-person point of view. All physical facts are facts that are accessible to everyone. I could assert that water is H2O, and you are free to confirm that or try to refute it as you see fit. You can go into the lab and go through the kinds of empirical procedures that go into demonstrating that water is H2O. Those same empirical procedures are just as accessible to you as they are to me. They're equally accessible to everyone. But here again, what it's like, the subjective character of an experience, is only accessible from one point of view, namely the point of view of the experiencing subject, is only accessible from the first-person perspective. So no matter how far we advance in terms of our grasp of the total set of physical facts about physical reality, including the total set of physical facts about ourselves, our bodies, no matter how far all that knowledge progresses, we still will not have, just in virtue of that, just in virtue of the completion of the physical sciences, we still would not have a complete account of mind, which goes to show that the mental cannot be reduced to the physical. A materialist theory of mind, a physicalist theory of mind cannot be right, according to Jackson. What Mary knows beforehand, that is to say, before she leaves the room, is by hypothesis everything physical there is to know. But, Jackson asks, is it everything there is to know? What she knows beforehand is ex hypothesi, everything physical there is to know. But is it everything there is to know? It seems that the answer is no. And if the answer is no, then physicalism is false. And it seems the answer is no. Because she didn't know everything that there was to know about qualia. That is to say, she didn't know everything that there was to know about the phenomenological features of experience, or here again, the phenomenal character of experience. Here again, this term phenomenological, that means having to do with the content of experience. And here again, the thought behind the knowledge argument is that you can know everything that there is to know about the total set of physical facts, but the content of the experience, what is sometimes called the phenomenological, what is sometimes called the phenomenology. Here again, the content, the character, the what it's like of an experience. That would be left entirely out of account. An objective physical description can be given without making any reference to the what it's like, to the phenomenological features of experience. But the what it's like is essential to the mental state. Try to conceive of the mental state of knowing, well, let me put it this way. Try to conceive of the mental state of notice that you're in, the perceptual state of noticing the particular shade of red of a ripe tomato. Try to conceive of that mental state without any reference to what it's like to have that experience. I mean, it sounds almost ridiculous to say, doesn't it? It seems like a conceptual impossibility. That's because the what it's like is essential to the mental state. That's how we distinguish the different perceptual states that we go through, by what they're like. So the what it's like, the phenomenological character of the experience, the phenomenal character or the phenomenological content of the experience, that's essential to the experience. You leave that out and you're no longer talking about the same thing. But here again, science, the physical sciences necessarily leave out the what it's like. Think back to our example in Nagel of the difference between the description of water that the physicist or the chemist gives and the perceptual experience that we have of interacting with water. Here again, it's sensible qualities at the macrophysical level, the wetness of it, the way it feels. That is left completely out of account of a chemist's or a physicist's description of what water is. So the sensible properties of the substance is essential to the perception of it, but plays no role in the objective physical description of it. And as Jackson sees it, as Nagel sees it, that gap never can be bridged. It's not just, here again, they're not just saying that it seems improbable. They're saying there's a fundamental kind of obstacle, right? Think back to Nagel's distinction between physical facts and experiential facts. The total set of experiential facts, I'm sorry, let me start that again. The total set of physical facts will not give you any of the experiential facts. Because here again, the experiential facts are only accessible from the point of view, from one point of view, they're only accessible from the inside. These, as Jackson calls them, these qualia, these phenomenological features of experience can only be known by having the experience. And that was the fundamental obstacle to Mary in the black and white room. She couldn't have the experience of seeing red. So all the knowledge of the total set of physical facts that she had could not have brought her one whit closer to understanding what it's like to see red, which according to Jackson shows that no physicalist theory of mind can be correct. The mental cannot be reduced to the physical.